Hey guys, welcome back to the Learn to Play series. Today we're going to be revisiting the Third World War, and this time we're going to be concentrating on the air war portion. I know there's been a lot of questions out there, so we wanted to tackle that, and Greg Warren is back to give us the information we need. So grab a drink, sit back, and learn all there is to know about the air war segment of the Third World War. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Mo. Well, welcome back to another Learn to Play for the Third World War. This time we're going to concentrate on the air war. And that's something that there's always quite a few questions about. And my simple answer is follow the expanded sequence of play. That's going to get you where you need to be. But we're going to walk through that and we'll get you there through a game turn. So, looking at the expanded sequence of play, we first start off with the initial segment. We've got the diplomacy phase, the neutral activation phase. We'll skip those for these purposes. And next we get to the aircraft maintenance phase. So it lists 5 things on there: receive new air units, roll for maintenance, destroy and ground air units, repair craters, and consolidate losses. So we'll walk through the process. The first step is to receive new air units. Now, this is at a different time during Pact impulse and the NATO impulses. That's where you will receive your ground units. But new air units are received in the aircraft maintenance phase of the initial segment. So what we will do here, we'll open up the air theater display and we will open up our reinforcement displays. We will pull in the new units that we need. So for the Pact, turn 2, it's pretty easy. We have one MiG-23 that comes in into the Western Europe theater. So we will move him in here. He goes right to the available box. So that will take care of the Pact for turn 2. NATO has a little bit more. We have the Marine Air Wing, which is made up of a Harrier AV-8B and an F-18 Hornet. That you have a choice of going to the Northern, the Western Europe, or the Balkan Theater. And I think we're going to go to the Balkan Theater because that's somewhere where I always have issues trying to keep the Soviets out of Istanbul. So we're going to move those into the Balkan Air Theater. And then we've got some other units coming in to Western Europe and the Southwestern. There are 2 Spanish air units. They will both go to the Southwestern Theater. We have an F-18 and a Mirage F-1. So they will go into the Southwestern. Now we will pull the U.S. units in. We have a U.S. A-10, a U.S. F-15, a U.S. F-15 Strike Eagle, a US F-16. And then we have the choice between the F-117 or the F-19. The F-19 was provided in the original game. That was purely speculative at the time. And we also have included an F-117. So we're going to include the F-117 since that's a little more realistic. Now, another thing that's not explicitly in the expanded sequence of play is the 6th Fleet F-14 air unit, which is down in the Balkan theater. I mean, he's in the flown box right now. But before we even roll for maintenance, which is going to be our next step, we need to see if the U.S. withdraws the carrier group from the Mediterranean. So this represents either the destruction or the withdrawal of the U.S. carrier group in the Mediterranean. So on turns 2 to 4, a die roll of 1 or less would mean that that F-14 is withdrawn. And so we will give it a roll and we get a 3. So he is not withdrawn. So he gets to spend another turn with us. Something else, his maintenance rating is a 6. So you get to move your units from the flown box to the available box if they roll equal to or less than their maintenance rating. So he's a 6. You can't roll more than a 6. So he just can move into the available box. As I said, the next part is the rolling for maintenance. So we will go up here and we will start in the Northern Theater. And we will start with our NATO units. Now, the Northern Theater is divided into sub-theaters, the Baltic and Scandinavian. It's an option rule. It's mentioned in the playbook. I'm not going to use it for this demonstration, but you certainly can. It just reflects a little more realistic of, the Poles aren't probably going to be running air missions into northern Norway, and much as Norwegians aren't going to be running air missions down into Denmark or even the northern part of the Germanys. So we will roll for the NATO units. The Norwegian F-16, he has a maintenance rating of 6, so he's going to automatically go up into the available box. And so we've got 3 units here with the rolls of 5 or less that they will go, and we'll roll, and they all pass. So they all will move to the available box. We'll do the same thing with the Pact. Their maintenance isn't as good. Most of their maintenance ratings are 4. Once you get into some of the reinforcements, they're 3s. So we will roll for the Pact, and we get a 6 for the Su-27. So he's going to stay where he is. And we get a 5 for the Su-20. So he's going to stay where he is. So we will pull in the other units into the available box, and that takes care of the North. We'll get back to it for NATO, Western Europe. We will roll, and one of the things I'm going to do is it's a lot easier. You can just rotate them, and if they fail their roll, and then you can do your rolls and then start moving everything over. US A10 and the US F111 all fail their maintenance rolls. F111 has a 4 rating, so theirs is a little lower. The 5 is typically we see for the NATO units. All right, so we will just go on and rotate them back, and so they will stay there. Same thing for the Pact over here. We're going to have a MiG-29 fail, a MiG-23. Both of the Czech MiG-21s are going to fail. An East German MiG-27, a Soviet MiG-27, and a Soviet Su-24. So we will pull all of the rest over. All right, so that gets our Pact. Southwestern Theater, not as many. We've got a MiG-23 here for the Pact, and he will pass. So he will move over. We've got an F-104, and he will roll a 6, so he fails. So he stays here in the flown box. Balkan Theater, as we mentioned, the F-14 automatically passed, and everybody but the A-7 passes their maintenance roll. And for the Pact, everybody but one of the Romanian IARs, 93s, will pass. All right, so that completes the maintenance phase. Okay, so the next step of the aircraft maintenance phase is to destroy and ground air units due to craters, grounding, Pact logistical breakdown. That's from the extended game, strategic nuclear exchange, which we won't be worrying about now. So we will start with destroying and grounding air units. So we will go up starting in the north. In the Vassal module, there's a nice air loss consolidation cup. You can also use this for grounding, and we'll talk about that later. But right now, we've got to take one air unit and draw him out to be destroyed. We'll move him over here. You actually have to place him in the cup in the center, but we'll have our Danish F-16 be destroyed. So he will move to the shot down box. Your other guys can move back over to the available box. And then once you destroy them, you can remove the destroyed plane. We'll do the same thing in the Western Europe theater. We've got 1. Now there's something else, when we've got, I don't know, there are about 20 units or so. I really don't like dragging 20 units into a box and then dragging 19 of them back. So one of the things that I kind of like to do is I pull up a handy dandy Excel, and you can do this in Google Sheets or Excel. Just type out a rand between 1 and the max number. just hit enter, and that will give you a random number. So then you can just pick out the one, and we're going to say we're destroying an F-15E. So he is going to go into the shutdown box. So that's just something I like to do with Excel, and you can do that on your phone if you're not next to a computer. It's just something that I like because it saves a lot of time, either physically moving counters if you're playing live with counters and map, or even in Vassal. All right, and so we will move the destroyed plane to 0, and then we have another one in the southwest, and the Italian Tornado G will be shot down, and we will move that counter marker down to 0. All right, so next we need to take care of craters. So same thing, we're going to randomly choose from the available box. We've got one crater in the north, and so we are going to ground the US F-16. So he will just move up into the grounded box. We have 3 units from Western Europe, so we are going to ground a West German F-4, the super powerful French Alpha Jet, and unfortunately, we got the F-117 grounded. And then in the Balkan, we have a crater also. So the F-14 isn't subject to grounding since he's carrier based. So we will just choose between the other 6 units. And so randomly, we pick the Turkish F-5. So he will go to the grounded box. That takes care of grounding for craters. Also, we would ground units, as I said, for Pact logistical breakdown. That's only if you're playing the 12-turn extended game, and strategic nuclear exchange. One of the different things about those two, the owning player gets to choose which units are grounded. It's not a random draw. The next part of this step of the maintenance phase is to repair craters. And so basically, you roll a 1 die 6, and that's the number of craters that are repaired. Now, there's been some discussion about it saying, does each side have the capability to do that many crater repairs outside of Western Europe? Western Europe, there's so many more resources, so many more units. And so in Paper Wars 103 that's going to come out, we have an optional rule saying that you divide your die roll by 2 for all theaters other than Western Europe. But for these purposes, we're just going a straight 1d6. Obviously, if there's one crater, you can remove it and really no need to roll. For the West, we're going to roll it. Western Europe, we're going to roll a 2. So we will move the craters down to 1. And Balkan, again, just a 1. So no need to roll. So we will move the crater marker for the Balkan down to 0. All right, our next fun step is to consolidate losses. Here we randomly choose again. If there's an odd number of units in the shot down box, we will draw 1 at first and move it back to the shot down box. Then we will draw half, send them to the flown box, and the other half are eliminated permanently. And so here we've got in the north, there's just 1 unit each for the Pact and for NATO. So they just stay there another turn. And this is one of the things you'll see in some of the smaller, less populated theaters. You can have units that can sit in the shot down box for several turns if there's just the 1 unit that has been shot down during air combat or air defense fire. But the Western Europe theater is a little more exciting. I guess not exciting if you're a pilot of one of these planes. But since we have 7, we will draw 1 randomly out first. So we will move these guys to a random draw box. And again, for our purposes, I'm just placing them around. They have to be, to draw them randomly, they have to be here in the middle. And we will draw the F-15E. The Strike Eagle is going back to the shot down box. So we will draw 3 more, and those will go into the flown box. And so we will have the French Mirage 2000, the US F-15, and the US A-10. The other units then are eliminated. So we can right click on those and just eliminate them. And same for the Pact in Western Europe, another odd number. So we will draw 1 randomly. That's the MiG-29. And I'm going to put these in here just so you can see how it works for Vassal. If you're not familiar with it, and you just stack them up and you just draw 1 out. We happen to draw the top one there. That one wasn't the top one, so that's how the randomizer works. We're going to return to the flown box, an SU-25 and an SU-27. So the Pact commander is happy that he gets his SU-27 back, and then eliminated will be a MiG-29 and a MiG-23. Same here thing here in the southwestern theaters we saw in the north, just one unit each, so nothing's done there. Balkan theater for NATO, again, one unit, so nothing's done there. And we have 5 units in the Balkan theater for the Pact. So we will randomly draw on the Soviet MiG-23 is going to stay there. And we will move our other guys out. And going to the flown box is the MiG-23 and a Romanian MiG-21. So our other Romanian MiG-21 will be eliminated along with the Soviet MiG-27. So that takes care of the aircraft maintenance phase. All right, so now we move on to the weather determination phase. Here we will roll 1d6 for each theater. A roll of 1 through 4 is good weather, so that would be clear. A roll of 5 or 6 is poor weather. And then you would roll a second time a 1d6, and a 1 through 4 is overcast, a 5 is storm, and a 6 is severe storm. So that will get your weather for each theater. So we're going to roll for the north, and we get a 2. So weather is going to be clear for the north. And we're just going to do one of each weather type. And so we will change the weather to overcast for Western Europe. Now, overcast means that any air unit with a non all weather rating is halved and rounded down. We will pick storms for the Southwest. Storms mean no air missions except for units with all weather ratings. Also, airborne and amphibious assaults are turned back on a roll of 1 to 3 on 1d6. That's checked before interceptors are assigned if you're doing the airborne assault. And the Balkan, we're going to go with severe storms. So, not good here. This means there are no air missions or amphibious or airborne assaults. All air mobile units movement is reduced to 3, so it's cut in half. A air mobile zone of control is treated as a standard zone of control, and no aircraft transfers in and out, and no air transport in or out. So this is kind of ugly. And what I'll do and what I do if I'm physically playing the game is I'll just kind of turn these units, and that way we know. Hopefully, that's a little reminder to tell us that we're not using these guys this turn. Next, in the initial segment, we will move on to the nuclear restraint phase, which is optional. We're not using that. And then next, we will move on to the theater air superiority phase. All right, so in the theater air superiority phase, this starts with the Pact units. The Pact will go first. This kind of represents the NATO AWACS advantage. Units with a S or M for their range, that's the top left letter on their counter, short or medium, they can only fly missions in their own theater. Those with an L can fly in their own theater or an adjacent theater, and those with an I can fly a mission in any theater. First, we will go for the Pact. We will move the Soviet MiG-29, the 2 Polish MiG-21s, and we're going to leave everybody else. We're going to leave our Tu-22, our MiG-27, and our Su-17 there in the available box, which will allow them to run strike missions or ground attack missions. So we're going to move on to the Western Europe theater. And unfortunately for the Pact, with the overcast weather, anything with a non all weather rating is halved and rounded down. So any of these units, the MiG-27s and the Su-24s with the 1 for their air superiority rating in the top right, that means they will have a 0. So they cannot be used for air superiority this turn. If you did watch the first Learn to Play video we did, we sent a lot of those units to air superiority because we really wanted it for the Pact in turn 1. So it's a lot more difficult, and especially the overcast weather doesn't help at all. So we are going to move our fighters, our Su-27s, our MiG-29s, MiG-23s. That's it. That's all we have. So we've got 6 units for air superiority. Chances are NATO will end up with air superiority in Western Europe this turn. For the Southwestern, now this is stormy weather, so we can only have units with a all-weather rating for air superiority. So that's just the MiG-23. And again, the Balkan, nobody's going anywhere, so they're all socked in. Once the Pact goes, we can move over to NATO. So for NATO for Western Europe, we're going to move all our fighters to air superiority, the F-15s, F-16s. We'll still decide about the Strike Eagle, the Mirage F1, we will move up there. The Jaguars just have a rating of 1 since they'll be halved, as does the Mirage F1. But we're going to move those up there because we want to make sure we get some units up there. And I think we're going to leave the Strike Eagle and the Tornado G down. Alpha Jet won't be able to fly, so we're going to rotate him. And we're going to move the F4 up into air superiority. I should have mentioned for the north, we did keep the marker on Pact air superiority. Now, since we have what looks like 10 units in NATO air superiority versus 6 for the Pact, we will change the marker to NATO air superiority. The Southwest, we can only have units with all-weather ratings. So we've already got the MiG-23 up there, and the F-8 Spanish F-18 will go. So that's all we have there. Again, nothing in the Balkan because of the severe storms. And so once we're done with this, we still have contested air superiority in the Southwestern theater, and we will now move to the deep strike phase. For the deep strike phase, we've got a handy dandy little display here, and we can close out of the random for now. Strike mission mat where you can lay out your strike missions. Deep strike missions don't fly to any particular location on the map. They just are flown in a theater. And so these deep strike missions are logistical strikes and runway cratering. And so the way this works first, the Pact will assign his strikes and escorts. NATO then can intercept those Pact missions and then assign their own escorts and strike missions. And then the Pact then has another chance to intercept any of those NATO missions that they created. Short range units with the S there in the top left, they may not escort runway cratering or logistical strike missions, but they may intercept them. We're not going to run any in the north because I think we've got some other strike interdictions that we want to do there. So we will concentrate on Western Europe. And so the Pact will go first. Now, we don't have air superiority. NATO does. So the Pact can only assign 1 escort per mission. NATO can assign 2 either escorts or interceptors. But we're going to move our TU-160 and we're going to have them escorted by our SU-27 for runway cratering. We're also going to have our TU-22 from the north. Since he's long range, he can run missions into neighboring or adjacent air theaters. So we're going to have him go, and actually, we should move these guys down into Western Europe. So we will move them there. We're going to send the TU-22 down to Western Europe, and we are going to escort him with the MiG-29. Now, he can either come, if it's a long-range unit, there aren't many long-range fighters other than, I think, the US F-15. And so they can be escorted by units out of the target theater. We're going to run a logistical strike. Normally, if I was playing the game for real, I wouldn't be running logistical strikes into probably turn 6 and try to slow down some of the Pact reinforcements that are coming in, since getting them out of supply cuts their movement in half. But for our purposes, we're going to run a logistical strike here, and we're going to have an SU or a MiG-27, or I'm sorry, an SU-24, and he will be escorted by a MiG-29 also. Oops, and we will move them down into the logistical strike area. Southwestern, we are going to run, since we really only have our MiG-21 actually isn't available to use since he doesn't have any all-weather ratings. Same with our Mirage F1. And so we're going to use our MiG-27 to do a runway cratering mission in the Southwest. He'll be escorted by the MiG-23. And so next, NATO gets to intercept and assign Pact missions and assign their own strikes and escorts. So we're going to use, for the first one, for the big guy, we're going to send an F-15 up against the Su-27. So that's going to be a 5-on-5 battle. And we're going to use the Belgian F-16 for this one. Now we can assign 2 units, but one of the things that we've got going here is even though the pack couldn't assign these guys to air superiority, they all have all weather ratings on their strike interdiction number, which is the bottom right number. And so that's 7 missions that can be run there. So we're not going to double up on many of these. And we're also going to run, since we can assign, we're going to run a runway cratering mission for NATO with the Strike Eagle. And we're going to escort with an F-15. And then we're going to throw a Jaguar in there also. Now, one of the things that this does, if you assign 2 escorts to a mission, basically that means your strike aircraft is getting through because you can only have round 2 of air combat where the interceptor is attacking the strike or ground attack aircraft if there are no air units left on the striking side. And so here with 2 units, it can't happen. So, this guarantees that the F-15E is going to get through to the target. He still has to get through air defense fire, but he will at least make it to the target. And the logistical strike, we're going to choose not to intercept him. Again, it's scarce resources, so you kind of got to try to figure out what's best. And there's not always an easy answer. But the good thing is for NATO is it burns up this MiG-29 that gets used, and he'll go into the flown box when this mission is done. For the Southwestern Theater, we're going to go on and intercept with our Spanish F-18. And then the Pact then has a chance to intercept the NATO mission that was just assigned. We're going to choose not to intercept again because we have basically 3 units left. We've got 4 ground attack units, the Su-17s and the Su-25s. Each of those would only bring about 1 column shift because you do half if you're decrease halved by the weather and you would round down. So all of those are going to be worth 1 column shift. But we do have these MiG-27s and Su-24s that we can perform strike interdictions with if we choose to. So we're going to not intercept this one. All right, so next we'll move into our air combat. And so first we will start out here with our first runway cratering mission. We've got the Su-27 and F-15. Both are rated a 5, so they will fire simultaneously. So even if you get a shot down halved or a shot down immediately, the opposing side still gets to take their shot at full strength. So after everything's assigned, and I'm going to just to make this a little more, give a different feeling, I'm going to add this Mirage F1 to this interception here for the TU-160. And so here we're going to have air combat first. We're going to have the 5s fire simultaneously. So even if they get a shot down halved or a shot down immediately, the other side will still get to fire at full strength. So we will do that first. First, we will fire with the F-15 versus the Su-27. He rolls a 4, so that's shot down and halved. As I said, the Su-27 still gets to fire at full strength. And so he rolls a 4 also and gets shot down and halved again. So both of those will go to the shot down box after this round of air combat. And then we've got the Mirage F1. He's a 3 air superiority rating, but since we have overcast skies, he's halved 1.5. Round down, he's a 1. So we've got a 1 firing against the 5. 5 really doesn't matter in this instance, but we have a 1 firing. And so he's going to roll a 2 and no effect. So at the end of the first round here, we are going to move our Su-27 to the shotdown box of Western Europe, and we're going to send our F-15 to the shotdown box of Western Europe. All right, so round 2, the interceptor still gets to attack now the TU-160. They get to add a +1 to their die roll since it is the second round of air combat. And so the Mirage F1 will fire on the TU-160. He's firing on the 1. So he rolls a 4, but plus 1 gets us a 5. So that means the Tu-160 is halved. Um, and so we've got this handy dandy little flag here that we can add for the vassal module. So he's halved. So our Mirage F1 will go back to the flown box of the Western Europe Theater. And now the Tu-160 will have to go through air defense fire. Air defense fire is here. We're going to roll on the runway cratering. So 1 through 4, he's safe. A 5 is aborted. A 6 is shot down and halved. And so we're going to roll and we get a 1. So no effect. He will end up getting to go through with his 3 because remember he was halved with the combat with the Mirage F1. Runway cratering, for each strike rating, you'll roll 1d6. A roll of 4 or 5 means a crater is added. A roll of 6 means an aircraft is destroyed. So we will roll. We get a 1, a 2, and a 5. And so we will come up here and we will add another crater to the NATO Western Europe track. And we will send him back to the flown box. All right, our next one, again, firing simultaneously, 4 ratings. So we're going to start with the F-16 firing first, and he rolls a 5, which means shot down and halved. And the MiG-29 will now fire. Again, he gets to fire his full rating. He rolls a 1, unfortunately. So that's no effect. So we will send our MiG-29 to the shot down box. And now our F-16 will be able to fire against our Tu-22, rolling on the 4 column, plus 1 to the die roll. And so he rolls a 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. So that means abort. Our Tu-22 does not get to carry out his mission, and he will go back to the flown box of the Northern Air Theater since that's where he came from. And that's also something you can do if you have a unit, if you're playing physically coming from another theater, you can use one of the generic markers, the red or the white on red X or yellow on red X, just to mark him just so as a reminder. But we're going to go on and send him back to the flown box of the Northern Theater. And then our F-16 will go to the flown box as well. All right, here we've got our unintercepted. So these guys will both go to the flown box that are doing our escorting. Our F-15E will go through air defense fire. We're going to roll a 3 here. And so no effect under runway cratering. And so we will roll again for him. Again, 4, 5, and 6 is a crater. Or 4 and 5 is a crater. 6 is a destroyed on runway. So we're going to roll and we get a 2, a 5, and a 6. So we will add to the Western Europe Theater 2 craters for the Pact and 1 destroyed on runway. Our F-15 will then go back to the flown box. And next we'll run our logistical strike. There's no air combat again since he wasn't intercepted. So we will send him back to the flown box. Our Su-24 will now go through air defense fire. For our Su-24, logistical strike, so a different column. Really, the only result here is aborted. 1 through 5 is no effect. 6 is aborted. So he's going to roll a 4 and no effect. So he carries out his logistical strike. So the way a logistical strike works is you get to roll 1d6 for every strike rating. You add those up, and that is the number of stacking points that are unsupplied. So we will roll 3d6. We get a 1, a 4, and a 5. So that's 10 stacking points unsupplied. So we will just have to remember that when we get to the supply phase and as the next part of this segment. Moving from Western Europe to the Southwestern Theater, we're going to have the F-18 against the MiG-23. Now we've had everybody firing simultaneously mostly, so this time we get a 4 versus a 3. So our Spanish F-18 will fire first in the 4 column. He rolls a 4 and gets a shot down and halved. All right, so that means the MiG-23 still gets to carry out the first round of air combat. He just has to go to the shutdown box after it, but his rating is halved. Now, when you're halved by combat, a point 0.5 you would round up. So he is going to fire as a 2 on this turn. And so in the 2, he will roll a 2, and that's no effect. So we will send him to the shutdown box of the Southwestern Theater. And the F-18 then will get to fire at the MiG-27, again, second round, so it's a +1 on the die roll. And he rolls a 4, +1 is a 5, so that's a shot down halved also. Same thing with the mission. He still gets to carry out his mission, but he will be shot down afterwards. Since he is halved, he gets 1 die roll for the runway cratering. So again, 4 or 5 is a crater, 6 is destroyed on runway. He rolls a 3, and so there's no effect. He will unceremoniously be shot down and sent back to the Southwestern Theater, and our F-18 will go to the flown of the Southwestern Theater. So that takes care of our deep strike phase. The next part of the initial segment is a supply phase. The first step is determine how many stacking points are unsupplied. There are none for Pact. Then we will determine how many NATO stacking points are unsupplied. So it's the Pact has 10, and so he will choose 10 stacking points that can be unsupplied. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the 3rd Armored Division. And there's a unit status. There's also a counter for the physical game out of supply. And so we get our OOS little tag there. We're also going to do the 1st Armored Division. We're going to do this French Attack Helicopter Regiment. Being out of supply will cut your movement in half. So since he's kind of back here as a reserve, we're going to cut his movement down. So we're going to do that. That gives us 7. We're also going to go with this guy. That's 8. And this guy, since he will be moving up most likely, we'll send him out of supply, and we're going to do the 2nd French Armored Division. All right, so there's our 10 stacking points. The next part is the Pact gets to determine emergency supply priority. Since they don't have anybody out of supply, that doesn't apply. The next is then NATO determines any emergency supply priorities. I think we really want this French attack helicopter unit to be supplied. So to put units back into supply with emergency supply, you have to take units that are twice the value of the stacking points out of supply. So we'll have to put 2 more stacking points out of supply. And so we will get rid of the out of supply. And NATO gets to choose which units. So we're going to choose this West German airborne unit to put out of supply. And we are going to take this Dutch motorized infantry unit and put them out of supply. So that takes care of the supply phase. The next part is the critical loss determination phase. We do have the handy dandy display here where you can use your units to track along. We've got 4 stacking points total for Turkey, so we can move them to 4. But we won't go through all of these. But nobody has been shaken or demoralized at this point. Looks like nobody on the Pact side. All right, so that finishes up the initial segment. Next, we will move on to our Pact segment. So the first part of the Pact segment is the Black Sea Fleet sortie phase. So basically, if the Pact has zones of control through the Turkish Straits naval zone, it would allow the Black Sea Fleet to sortie into the Aegean and Mediterranean. Obviously, that's not the case at this point, so the Black Sea Fleet does not sortie. Next, we will move up to the Norwegian Sea control phase. And the way the Norwegian Sea control phase works, there's a track on the turn record sheet 2 to 7, and the Norwegian Sea is NATO controlled. 8 or 9, it's disputed. 10 to 12, it's Warsaw Pact control. And then the Pact gets to add 1 to their die roll. It's 2d6 for every airfield that they control in Norway. And so we're going to look here, and we have that one's a port. That one's an airfield. That one's a port. And so it looks like we have 1 airfield that's controlled. So we will roll our 2d6, and we get a 5 and a 4. That's 9, plus 1 is 10. So 10 will get us to Warsaw Pact control. So what this means is that Pact units can run amphibious assaults in the Norwegian Sea naval zone without any hindrance. So the next part of the Pact segment is the strike interdiction phase. And this is where we run air missions to specific hexes to do strikes on units. So the first part of this is to remove strike markers left from this phase last turn. There's only one on the board. It's here in A2918. So we will remove him. So next, the Pact declares strikes and escorts. In turn 2, we're going to be sending some of these guys up here, the Poles, probably supported by the Marines, amphibious units for the Pact. We're going to try to get Denmark out of the game. So we're going to run a strike here on 3415. That's where the Jutland Danish unit is. And so we will run a strike mission there. And so first, the Pact declares their strikes and escorts. And this is in the Northern Theater. So we will use our MiG-27, and he will be escorted by, let's go with we're going to go 2 because we want this to happen. So we're going to use our MiG-21 and our MiG-29. And then I think this is going to be the only strike mission that we're going to run. So NATO then gets a chance to intercept in the north. So we'll have the UK Tornado G. That may not be the best decision since we've got a 4 and a 2 here, but we're just going to go with that for the purposes of this demonstration. Now, NATO, they can intercept and they can also run their own strike missions. Again, just because this is in the Pact segment, it doesn't mean that only Pact units can run strike interdiction missions. The Pact and NATO can both run them in both of the strike interdiction phases in the Pact segment and in the NATO segment that happens later in the turn. So we're going to start with air combat. We're going to have the MiG-29 against the Tornado G. He's a 4. And he will roll a 2. He is halved then. So that would be a 1.5 again for combat. You round a 0.5 up. For weather, you round a 0.5 down. So the Tornado G will attack as a 2, as will the MiG-21. So they will fire simultaneously. And we have the Tornado G firing as a 2. He rolls a 3, so no effect. We have the MiG-21 still firing as a 2, and so he gets a 4, and the Tornado G is halved again, and that would take him down to 0.75, which would round up to 1. But it's not going to matter since no one was shot down. There is no round 2 since they're the 2 escorts for the mission, so everybody will head back to their flown box. And then the MiG-27 will now go through air defense fire under the strike interdiction column. 1 through 4 is no effect, 5 is halved, and 6 is aborted. And so we're going to roll and we get a 3, so no effect. And so we will be able to add a Pact strike marker. And so since he has a 2 strike rating, we will put that on here, and we're going to actually send it to the side. So now we will roll for hits against the unit in the hex. So for each strike rating on the marker, you would roll a 1d6. A roll of 5 or 6 means that the unit suffers a disruption. So we're going to roll twice, roll 2, and we get a 5 and a 6. So tough luck for the Danes. So we're going to reduce his proficiency by 2. So he would be down to a 3. We'll move that strike marker back over him, And we will send our MiG-27 back to the Northern Theater. All right, so next we will move on to the Pact First Impulse. The first thing we do is we have the first echelon sub impulse, where the Pact will receive new ground units, and we will move units during the movement phase, and we will then perform combat. So we're going to move ahead here and pretend that we've had movement and combat occur. So movement and combat have occurred, except for this one combat here for Hamburg. And so right now we have a 4-to-1 odds. And also part of this is these units are isolated. The NATO units cannot trace a path of communication to a friendly source, which is basically any city or map edge to the west, without going through a zone of control. Since they have to go through 2916 here, that's obviously a zone of control. If there was a NATO unit there, that would nullify the zone of control, but it would have to stay that way through the path. So with that, we're going to have a 4-to-1 combat, but we can also provide some ground attack. And so that's what we're going to do. The Pact first assigns their ground attack and their top cover. And so we are going to have a Czech Su-17, and we're just going to kind of put them close to here. And we're going to have him escorted by an East German MiG-23. Then NATO gets to decide if they're going to send any units for ground attacks. So we're going to send an A-10. We're going to escort him. We're going to take these two French Jaguars and provide top cover for them. Remember, this is in the Northern Theater, so we're still in clear weather. Now, these guys really shouldn't be here. We're going to kind of pretend they're in the Western Europe Theater for our purposes. We're going to pretend. So we're kind of splitting the difference here, but we'll still carry this out. So round one, the MiG-23, since he's all-weather rated, and this is overcast for Western Europe, he still will roll on the 3 column, and he rolls a 6 against one of the Jaguars, so he is shot down and halved. Now he still gets to carry out his mission. He would just go to the shot down box afterwards. And so we'll let him fire. Now he's halved, and they're already halved down to 1 from the weather, and then they're going to be rounded by combat. So he will still go up backed up to a 1. So he's going to fire as a 1, and then he gets a 2 for no effect, and the other Jaguar rolls a 2 for no effect. So one of the Jaguars will go to the shot down box, one will go to the flown box, and our MiG-23 will go to the flown box. So here we're going to go through air defense fire. First, we will go roll for the Su-17. He rolls a 1, so no effect for ground attack. For the A-10, we're going to roll a 3 and no effect also. And we're going to assume they're in the Western Europe Theater, so these would both be halves. So he would have a 2-column shift. The Czechs would provide a 1-column shift. So this would be a 1-column shift in favor of the defender. So we will send our units back, and we're going to have a 3-to-1 combat. And we're just going to carry this one out, even though we're doing air, but we're rolling on the 3-to-1 column, and we get a 6. So that's the lovely exchange, which means that the defenders are all eliminated, and so they have 2 plus 9 plus 4. That would give us 15 points. So the Pact then would have to eliminate 15 points as well. In addition, all the attacking units that survive suffer 1 disruption. And so we're going to eliminate these guys. And so we're going to have to get rid of 15 points. And we've got a 10 and a 12. We've got 2 9s, 2, a couple 9s. And so we're going to, it doesn't always work out where you can give up just 15. So we're going to end up giving up 18. And so we're going to eliminate the 20th Tank Division and the 10th Tank Division for the Poles. And then each other unit will get their proficiency reduced by 1. And we're just going to move our Northern Front Air Mobile Brigade and our 103rd Guards Motorized Airborne Division for advance. All right, so that concludes our first echelon sub-impulse. Next, we would have the second echelon and breakthrough sub-impulse. This is where any Pact units not in a NATO zone of control would be able to move and attack. And so we will skip forward here. And also at the end of the second echelon, there's also a regroup phase. So any units that did not move or attack during both of the sub-impulses would be able to gain one proficiency. Now, the Pact, once they lose one, they cannot gain that initial one back. So once they suffer one disruption, they can't gain it back. So we're going to go on and move ahead. So we've moved past the NATO reserve impulse. That's the impulse where any NATO units not in a Pact zone of control can move and attack. So we're going to skip past that. We're going to skip past the Pact second impulse, which actually works just like the Pact first impulse with the two echelons. And we will move to the NATO segment. First, we would have the strike interdiction phase. So we would remove any strike markers left from this phase last turn. And there's one up here in Norway in the mountain pass. And so we will go on and delete that. And so next here, we would run our strike interdiction missions. And then we would move into the NATO first impulse where new ground units are received. We go through the movement phase, the combat phase, and then the regroup phase. And then we would go through the NATO second impulse, which is exactly the same as the first, except you don't receive new units again, obviously. So the movement phase, the combat phase, and the regroup phase. That then takes us to the final segment. Just a few more steps during this segment. We will have the aircraft landing phase, the unsupplied grounded unit recovery phase, the overland communications phase, which is only in the Balkan Entente scenario, which we would not have. And then we would have the nuclear escalation phase. Again, optional, so we're not going to do that here. The aircraft landing phase, as you can see through the NATO reserve impulse, the Pact second impulse, and the NATO first and second impulse, we've used up all our air units, so they're all already landed. But at this point, if you would have any air units in the air superiority box, you would just move them to the flown box. Pretty simple there. Also, during this time, you can do transfers out of the available box. And units can transfer no matter what their range is, even if they have a short range, they can transfer to any other theater, but they would just go to the flown box. And so we're going to strengthen up Western Europe a little bit. So we're going to send our Hungarian MiG 21. He will go to the flown box of the Western Europe theater. And we're going to do the same with the Spanish Mirage F1. He will go to the flown box on the NATO side of the Western Europe theater. The unsupplied grounded recovery phase. For that, any of our out of supply units would be put back into supply. And we won't go through all of those, but you get the idea. And then the grounded recovery part of the phase, basically any units in the grounded box would move to the available box. And I think there's some confusion on this. Do they go to the flown box? Where do they go? Just think of it as they were grounded out of the available box. They get grounded and they come back to the available box. So we're going to have the F-16 come back down into the available in the north. And we're going to have these four guys come back down to available in the Western Europe theater. And so that takes care of the final segment, and that's the end of game turn 2. Okay, so we would move on to turn 3 and to the initial segment where we would start with the diplomacy phase if we're doing the combined game or Persian Gulf, neutral activation phase, and then the aircraft maintenance phase. This is just like we did at the beginning of this. We would start by rolling for the withdrawal of the 6th Fleet F-14 down in the Balkan theater. We would receive new air units. We would roll for maintenance, moving units from the flown box to the available box that pass their maintenance check of rolling equal to, less than or equal to their maintenance rating. We would then destroy and ground air units due to craters and grounding. And we would then repair craters. And then consolidate losses. And again, that's where if you have an odd number, you'd pull the first one back into the shutdown box. Half you would move to the flown box, and the other half would be permanently eliminated. And then you would just keep on moving through with the air superiority and the deep strike phase, and move into the meat of the ground war in turn 3. So that takes care of our learn to play for the air war for the Third World War. We hope this has been helpful, and thanks for joining us, and good gaming out there.